So I'm really excited that Bill Draper is here to speak today. He spoke actually at the first Lens of VC class, also spoke last year, and has been kind of the key aspect of this class, talking about venture capital from past to present, given that he's been pretty much one of the founding fathers of Silicon Valley, in my mind, one of the first venture capitalists on the West Coast. Has since started a number of VC firms, but also what I really admire, has a philanthropic arm. So we're here at Draper Richards today, in which he basically funds social entrepreneurs. I'll let him talk a little bit about investing during the rise of Sand Hill Road, during the rise of Silicon Valley, and how that's completely different from investing today, as well as he lived through the dot-com bubble, and he's basically seen everything since Silicon Valley has started. And fun fact is, he went to Yale, and he was part of a secret society called Skull and Bones.
I have to leave.
Maybe he can secretly talk about that. So.
I don't think so. Anyway, I am here and you're here, and let's make this kind of in and out and back and forth. But I'll just kick it off by telling you what it was like back in 1959 when I first moved out here. I joined the very first venture capital company in Silicon Valley, which was not called Silicon Valley at that time. It was a lot of orchards and very sleepy little town of Palo Alto. And it was a very pleasant place to be. The first venture firm was started by my father, and a man, he was running the Marshall Plan in Paris. And the man who ran it out of Washington, Averell Harriman, suggested to him that he get a guy named Fred Anderson, who had during the war run the 8th Bomber Command out of London. There was a movie, 12 O'Clock High, written about, all about the bombing over Berlin, and a lot of those pilots didn't come back. And so Fred Anderson was a very interesting choice, but he did become my father's deputy, and they both had the rank of ambassador, and they worked together for about 3 or 4 years in Paris, running the operations of the Marshall Plan. Got to know each other very well. Both of them were intrigued. My father had been an investment banker in Dillon. He was with Dillon Reed, which is like Morgan Stanley is today, really. And he knew of 2 or 3 venture firms, 2 in New York, the Rockefellers and the Whitneys. They each had some venture firms. The Rockefellers backed Eastern Airlines as a venture deal, and Minute Maid, and Orange Juice Company as a venture firm. But they were both family companies. And then there was a company up in Boston called American Research and Development that a man named George Dorio, who taught at Harvard Business School, actually he taught me later on. And he was a great guy and had a venture firm that it went out of business because they made a bad choice. They weren't a family company, but he decided to take it public. And if you know anything about the venture world, there are these, big hits, and then there are some lemons, and you end up with a very blocky earnings. So it's not a good organization to go public where you want a steady increase in earnings on a regular basis. So the year to year, you constantly are comparing earnings and so on. That doesn't work for a venture capital company. So American Research and Development eventually went out of business, but Dorio was a great guy and a good friend of my father's. So my dad was interested in getting into the venture world when he left public service, and talked to Anderson about this, and Anderson liked the idea. They both knew Northern California. Anderson having been with up at the Travis Air Force Base north of San Francisco, and my dad having come over to do the financing for the Oakland Bay Bridge. And they undoubtedly liked the weather and all the other parts of this place that we like. But of course there was no Silicon Valley and none of what you know today. But there was Stanford. And without Stanford, there wouldn't have been any Silicon Valley. Anyway, they came out and they wanted, they had one other fellow who was a local lawyer named Gaither, Rowan Gaither. And he was quite a guy. He had been president of the Ford Foundation, chairman of the board of Rand Corporation, and then he joined them and became Draper, Gaither and Anderson, the first venture capital company. They needed some young guys to do the grunt work, and I was one of those, so 5 of us came and joined them in 1959. And this wonderful man, Fred Terman, who was the Dean of Engineering at Stanford and became the provost at Stanford, understood that all these great technology that came out of his department wouldn't go anywhere without some connection to the business community. And you have a great product, but you got to sell it, and you got to finance it, and you got to make a company grow in order to get it delivered to make it useful. As a result, one thing he did was to introduce Dave Packard to Bill Hewlett. Bill was the creative one, the engineering guy, and Packard was working at General Electric at the time, and he put them together. And at Stanford, as you all know, Leland Stanford said in his will, you can have 9,000 acres, my farm, but you can't sell even 1 acre of that, ever. And so whether it was Terman or others, figured out that they could lease the land. They leased Hewlett-Packard some land, and that was the beginning of Hewlett-Packard after they got out of the garage. And they also leased us a little building, or a plot of land in which we built a building on Welch Road to come over, because we were going into the venture capital business, and we were going to encourage technology and finance it and get young companies started. So he was very interested in that. I mean, this place could be called Terman Valley rather than Silicon Valley quite easily, because he was an imaginative, very creative. I'll tell you one story about him. I went to Yale, and at Yale we had an engineering department that was equal to Stanford's I graduated in 1950. And a guy named Whit Griswold taught me history, American history, and halfway through, he was asked to be president of Yale, which he did. And when he got in, he'd been a great history teacher, but he made some huge mistakes as president of Yale, because one of the big ones was that he said, engineering, that's like dentistry. Teaching, we don't teach dentistry. We shouldn't be teaching engineering. We teach biology and chemistry and physics and all the sciences, but we shouldn't teach engineering. So he cut back the engineering department quite rapidly. At the same time exactly, Fred Terman beefed it up. He became, the provost, and he's strong position on the budget, and he beefed up the engineering department at Stanford at exactly the same time. And Yale has been way back ever since in that field. Of course, you talk to the Yaleys and they say, yeah, but Stanford will never catch up to our English and our history departments. But anyway, that's life, and that's a big reason Silicon Valley got started was because of Fred Terman. Anyway, we had a great time. I stayed only about 3 years before starting my own company, which became Sutter Hill Ventures, and is still operating in Palo Alto as a venture capital company. And I found venture capital to be absolutely wonderful because you interact with so many very energetic young entrepreneurs. And so I would recommend it to anyone, but it was very profitable in those days because there were very few of us. There was just us. And then eventually Kleiner Perkins came along, and Mayfield came along, and a few others. Sequoia quite far back, but they came along, and we would exchange information. A deal would come in, it'd be a $3 million deal, and we would say, well, we'll take $1 million, and let's give Kleiner $1 million and Mayfield $1 million, and they would do some of the research and vetting some of the entrepreneurs and the market and so on. As a result, we got the very best of the cream of the crop, and we had very good support in doing the research, so our returns were superb. I mean, like I think, a Canadian company put $10 million into Sutter Hill a little later, 1962 or something. But the owner, the president of that company, a guy named McNaughton, said to me that $10 million investment for them turned into $1 billion, and I think it did. Those were numbers that were pretty big then and still are. So our returns were like 20% a year on year, and so I wondered, though. I was in my little office, and I got a call that the president of Goldman Sachs wanted to come see me. So he came out here, and I had no idea. I said, what in hell is he doing? And when he left, I said, well, I have no idea why he was here or why I was. And I hadn't realized that those earnings were so big. Wall Street wasn't making 20-25% a year on their companies. So he gets a truck full of money, and he drives it out here, and he dumps it, and it goes back, and another truck full comes, and more money comes pouring in, and pretty soon those earnings began to go down. And now the venture capital company isn't where I would recommend all of you go. I would say become an entrepreneur. You just walk down Sand Hill Road, and if in the third stop you haven't got your money, must be a pretty bad idea. So I think if you're going to be a venture capitalist, I mean, you will have fun, you'll interact, as I say, you won't have to work. You just let those other guys make the money for you. But it won't be nearly as profitable as it was in my day. But being an entrepreneur is very exciting. And as you know, just reading the papers, entrepreneurs around Silicon Valley are buying the big houses, and they're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. It's much harder work. I know. I know it's really hard work to be an entrepreneur, and it's the highest divorce rate in the country, and so you're taking some risks, and you're in a. But if you love what you're doing, And you will, because it's your idea and you're pushing it, and for a while nobody's listening, but then eventually you get people to listen, the thing begins to grow, you begin to get proud, and like a little, a little seed, the oak tree grows, and pretty soon you're taking a lot of credit for what has been built at your with your ideas and the people you selected in the beginning, but all of a sudden it's much bigger than you ever expected. So having said all that, I'm going to now open it up to you and take about 10 minutes to go around and see what characteristics you think are needed to be a good entrepreneur, to be a really successful entrepreneur, beside putting the company before your wife. No, I'm kidding. So let's, I want to ask, who's got an idea of what are, name one characteristic, and we'll go around and get some others.
Persistence.
Persistence is really important. And it's hard to judge whether somebody has that or not for the venture capitalist, but persistence is really key, because there are ups and downs. There are a lot of downs in the beginning, and you got to decide, I started this, I'm going to finish it. It's a great one. Yeah.
I was going to say grit, but I'm also thinking a little bit more about being a connector and finding the right people to join your
Yes.
idea.
And that's something else that a venture capitalist looks for, is somebody who, for instance, I look at an entrepreneur and I say, would I like to work for that woman or for that man? You know, will she bring a big team together that are people that I'll admire and really want to work with? Or is this just, is she kind of, well, I got to go to work, but she's got a great idea, but I would hate to spend more than an hour with her. Good one. Yeah.
Visionary.
Exactly. You got to be able to sort of see around the corner in the horizon and be able to find, imagine what is going to happen. And that means not just all the products that are out there today, but you got to feel what is XYZ company working on for their next product, or sniffing around what is about to happen. It isn't just me that's going to put in a new product. There are other people working in the same area. How far ahead might they be by the time we get there? So, very good one. Wait, I better go over here and then I'll get back. Yeah. Big time. I mean, and whether it's venture capitalist or an entrepreneur, for instance, I was lucky to be born to a great father. It starts right there, and I've been lucky ever since. I've fallen into a bunch of good jobs and had a bunch of luck. And luck is so important, and by the time you get to be the big oak tree, you don't give much credit to luck. You kind of take it all yourself, but it has big impact all along. Yeah, and back to you.
You have to be authentic, because it's too hard to be an entrepreneur unless you actually care about the idea or product that you're working on.
Absolutely right. If you try and fake it, it's going to come out pretty quick to other people, and you're not going to really get anywhere. And you wouldn't have the, you might have the vision, but you wouldn't have the persistence if you weren't authentic. You'd be quitting before you hardly got started. Yes.
A resilient mindset, so you can see failure as an opportunity to.
Wait a minute.
A resilient mindset, where you see failure as an opportunity to pivot, grow, and learn.
Yep. My son has this organization called Draper University, which takes in about 40 students at a time. They're all college age, either just before, just after, or during college, and it's all about innovation. And I think they have a mantra It's a fun thing. I mean, it just lasts for 8 weeks, and he teaches about 3-4 sessions a year, and down in San Mateo. And by the way, it's fun to drop in on that just to see them. But just what she said, you know, if you don't have some of that, you don't. You know, it doesn't really work. She's, you put your finger on an important one. I think in this mantra that he has, he says, they say, I don't know what it goes for about 3 minutes, and they all say it every morning. It's kind of crazy. And then they jump in the pool, and then they go to work. But it goes something like, fail and fail and fail again until you succeed, you know, that kind of thing. So they kind of promote failure, which I wouldn't quite be so strong. But anyway, it's being able to fail and pick yourself up is what differentiates us from, say, Boston, I think. You know, everybody says, well, why is Silicon Valley had it and Route 148 doesn't have, or whatever it is, 128. Why are they? Because, you know, those Bostonians, they're sort of buttoned down, and they're like me, and they're a very kind of, if they inherited the money, they're afraid to lose any of it, and that kind of thing. But go west, young man, you know, and the idea of failure out here is kind of another badge of experience. So I couldn't agree more. That is it's something to take on your sleeve and pick yourself up and say, I tried that one, I'll try it a different way, but I failed, but that's just part of my life. And everybody fails at some point.
Persuasive, like able
Pardon?
Persuasive, being able to sell his offer vision to his colleagues, investors.
Being persuasive, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that, now let's recognize, yeah, very important. You got to sell whatever it is, and you got to sell a venture capitalist. It's a good idea to get the money. You got to sell the people to join you that might be a little. You got to sell the product when you get it made. You got to. Selling is a big part of life. In every part of life. So let's take those ideas and recognize that they aren't all going to be in one person. So the point made that you need somebody that's going to bring a team together is very important, and all of us need to think in terms of, well, who would I have on my team? And so when I was a venture capitalist, my attitude was, the guy is an engineer, and his next 7 hires are engineers, and I'm thinking, well, we're not going to get this off the ground unless we sell it, and so why isn't he thinking of some people that are not quite like him to broaden out the base and build the whole organization? So you have to have a mix in your team, because no one person's going to have all the characteristics that you guys have mentioned. So what we want to do is get a balanced team, and then go for it and build it up as fast as possible, but also being cautious about failure and not trying to trip by going too fast. I'm going to leave it there. You've named some characteristics that I would have come up with as my first 10 too. By the way, okay, is there any characteristics that you see for a venture capitalist that a venture capitalist ought to have? Let's name 2 or 3 of them that haven't been named. Yeah.
Identifying folks who have all the attributes we just mentioned.
Good. So sort of people sensitive, or I mean, that would, to me, that was more important, having the right leader and sort of sniffing and feeling. I have a a good feeling about people. I got on a boat going over to Europe, and I thought I was in a food line, and but I was in deck chair line, and these two gals in front of me were sisters, and they sat next to me, and it was a 5-day trip. And at the end of the 3rd day, I asked one of them to marry me. And we've been married for 63 years. And I've got a good people sense. I mean, that's what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't take me long to figure out that. So any other character?
Well, having an open mind, because you're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs that are really visionary but seem a little crazy in their time, so having an openness.
Being willing, yes, because you never thought of that idea, and now give me a little time to think about. Having an open mind is a very good idea.
Having tolerance for uncertainty.
Say it louder.
Having tolerance for uncertainty.
Having tolerance for
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Oh, exactly. Oh, yeah, and you're going to, let's face it, a venture capitalist, particularly today, they have more failures than they did successes. In my day, I don't remember that. We had more successes than we had failures. But it is true. You got to have tolerance for a failure, not be afraid to take a risk, because a high risk often brings a high return. And, well, I shouldn't say often, but when it brings a high return, it pays for a lot of other high risk situations that you backed that didn't. Yeah.
Connector, someone who connects different people together.
Yeah, that's good. Because once you're in a deal, you are a partner. And a good venture capitalist is a great support system for the entrepreneur. Good venture capitalist is like a partner, keeps in touch with the problems, and a good entrepreneur will open up and tell that venture capitalist the problems that he's got even before the board meeting. The worst characteristic of an entrepreneur can have is trying to hide serious problems from the board. If you don't let the board know quickly what the problems are, they're just going to get rid of you eventually, because you've got to share the problem, because they will be able to help you solve the problem if they learn about it early. And if they don't learn about it early and they hear about it late, they're going to be mad. They're going to wonder why you didn't tell them. So, very good. One more characteristic. Yeah.
So either having a really great network of friends or people that you know, or being able to build that network.
Yeah, and it's a little like connectivity that he mentioned. That's right. You got to have that to be able to help the entrepreneur. I've got a contact at General Electric. It can put you in touch. And then the willingness to follow through and make the call and introduce and all that, because it takes work. So it isn't just like writing a check. Okay, those are some good characteristics.
So we talked a little bit about good characteristics of entrepreneurs, good characteristics of investors, and you've started a number of firms, initiatives. What do you think are good characteristics of founding partners at VC firms?
What do I think the characteristics of founding
partners at VC firms, founders of venture capital firms?
Well, we're getting to some of them. I mean, the networking capability, the people sense, the willingness to take risks. I think all of these that were recently mentioned. And then, again, the same characteristic, do you really want to work with this person? We used to, on a yellow pad of paper at Sutter Hill, we used to have a list of all the investments that we had made, and the name of the president and the telephone number, and we used to hand it to the guy after making an offer and saying, call them to see what kind of partner we are. Because the entrepreneur should do exactly the same thing the venture capitalist does. They should vet vet and check out whoever it is that they're going to be answering to in some ways, getting their money from, sitting on the board with. Do I really want to have this guy's money or this venture capitalist team working with me? And who in the venture capital company is going to be the guy that or the gal that's going to sit on my board? You should find that out early to be sure you know who's going to be your teammate, because a lot of entrepreneurs will tell you that the money was important, but the most important thing they got were some of the things that you've been talking about: connections and partnership, relationships, working together.
How do you see the VC investment out of the U.S., especially in the developing?
How do I see the VC investment?
Out of the United States, especially in the developing countries.
Robin Richards and I met after I had done some government service with the Export-Import Bank and the United Nations, and I came back, was watching the grass grow, and she, a guy said, you should come to Stanford tonight because this gal has gotten a group together to study my investing in privately in Peru or something. And what I had told him was what I wanted to do was start a venture capital company in Asia, because having gotten to know the world, I knew that Asia was growing fast and there were no venture capitalists over there. So I went to that evening. She got credit for it. A couple of days later, we got together for breakfast at El Fornillo, and in 3 hours we were partners. I told you I have quick sense on people. In 3 hours we were partners. She knew how much of the company she was getting. We knew we were going to Asia. We knew we were going to start this venture capital company together. And Robin Richards has been my partner ever since, and she helped me start this Draper Richards Kaplan. By the way, Rob Kaplan in it, you'd be interested to know, was asked by the Fed anyway. He's been named now to the Fed. He's running all the southwestern operations of the Federal Reserve Bank, but he's still on our board, Draper Richards Kaplan. He came in late, but Robin and I got this started early and 12 years ago, and we're going to talk more about that a little. Maybe we should. Where did you go?
Right here.
Oh,
right
there
here,
you go.
Bill.
Okay. Do you want to just come over here and give 3 minutes on Draper Richards Kaplan before we go into the other program?
Sure. So we are a venture philanthropy fund, and the whole premise, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically kind of trying to take the venture capital model that Bill used very successfully in the private sector and apply it to the world of philanthropy, apply it to doing good, to solving social problems. So we're structured much in the same way as a venture capital fund is. We look for many of the same things in entrepreneurs or in deals as a venture capital fund would. All the characteristics that you just described in terms of what you would look for in an entrepreneur, the same things that we look for largely in an entrepreneur. The biggest difference between what we do and what a venture capital fund does is we don't focus or worry at all about a financial return. We simply focus on the social return. We, as a fund, we are sector agnostic, so we'll do anything from education to healthcare, economic empowerment, poverty reduction, agriculture. About half our portfolio is domestic, about half our portfolio is international, so quite a few things in the developing world space. And we tend to be pretty early stage. Many times we are the first institutional donor or investor, if you will, in a lot of these organizations. Up to this point, they've just been kind of bootstrapping or kind of piecing together funds from here or there. And ultimately, you know, what we look for at its core is the same thing that a venture capital fund would look for. We're not looking for things that are going to be a point solution or a localized or regional solution, but ideas that are going to try to kind of change the paradigm of how one particular problem is being solved. to give you maybe just a couple of examples of organizations that we've funded, probably one of the most well-known is Kiva.org. If any of you have heard of that, it was one of the earliest, maybe even one of the first crowdfunding platforms for social causes. We were an early supporter of Kiva.org. Another organization we supported is IDEO.org. I'm sure many of you are familiar with IDEO, the design firm. They kind of spun out a nonprofit, if you will, focusing on social causes. We were an early supporter of that, helping to incubate the idea. Another organization that I'm really excited about is one of our more recent grantees, an organization called WOTC. They came out of Y Combinator through their nonprofit track, started by a gentleman named Chase Adams. And they're developing a platform for global health financing. And right now the idea is to kind of just as a crowdfunding platform for global health financing, but kind of getting to that point that I was talking about earlier. We don't want to be funding things that are just localized or regionalized or a point solution. His ultimate goal is to really be the vehicle for global development health financing. In essence, he almost wants to replace insurance companies in the developing world through the platform and model that he's developing. Quite an ambitious goal, obviously, but those are the types of ideas we like to try to fund here.
That's great. Do you have a question or two? Let's take two questions for him about the foundation.
Speaking of like social change, like how do you measure that versus like a traditional VC may measure your IRR, like there's typical things that they measure?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to do, and everyone in the venture philanthropy impact investing world, I think, is trying to figure this out, and I don't think anyone has come up with a good way of doing it. There are various organizations that are coming up with measurement systems. B Corp or B Lab is coming up with a system. The Global Impact Investing Network is kind of coming up with a system in partnership with Rockefeller. So there's people trying to do this to try to develop a metric that you can kind of apply across all sectors or all organizations. The industry as a whole, if you will, is not there yet. Ultimately, what most organizations do is they end up measuring outputs. So we served this number of people. These many students went through our program. Ultimately, what you want to be doing is measuring outcomes. You know, we were able to reduce poverty by X amount. We were able to reduce low birth weight babies by X amount. So I'd say, right now as an organization, we probably focus more on the former than the latter. And it is, maybe something that at some point in time, hopefully we'll be focusing more on outcomes as opposed to outputs.
One more question.
So how do you think about double bottom line investing instead of impact investing and firms that measure both financial and social return?
Sure. So here we don't really do double bottom line investing. We focus strictly on the social return. So don't worry at all about the financial return. That is something, though, a number of organizations are kind of double bottom line investors. And kind of to the earlier question, it kind of gets to like, how do you measure that second component and what are the trade-offs involved? A lot of impact investors will tell you there's no trade-off between the financial return and the social return. In some cases, maybe there isn't, but to a large degree, I think there is some sort of trade-off that you're gonna have to make.
I think it would be a huge loss if we don't ask this question. So generational investing. Obviously your son, Tim Draper, started DFJ, Draper Fisher Jurgensen. Your grandson, Adam Draper, started Incubator, Boost VC. I guess your granddaughter started a TV show around Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And I guess just a couple weeks ago, Tim Draper, your son, along with Billy, announced a new VC fund.
Right.
So if you can just comment a little bit about, I think the Draper family name is so strong in Silicon Valley and its impact in terms of investing in all aspects of investing.
Okay, I'll give you a little background. My son, who we named Tim because I was William Henry Draper III, and when I was a young guy, I thought, God, this is so embarrassing to be the third. And so he rides his bicycle down the road. We were in a flag lot that in Atherton, and he got hit by a car 3 times on his bicycle. Once on our road out to the out to the main road by his mother. Another time, he took his bike out on the main road and got hit. And the third time at Stanford, as a student, going downhill as fast as he could, and smashed into a car, broke the windshield, walked away. In all three cases, totally unharmed. He, a little later in life, went to Hong Kong, and he ate snake oil. This guy was selling snake oil on the street in the middle of about midnight. And my friend Jim Gaither, who's the son of the Ron Gaither I talked about, Jim was with him and somebody else. One of the guys that we backed as an entrepreneur, a Chinese fellow, David Lee. And they couldn't believe that Tim said, when this snake oil salesman says, you know, drink some of this, it'll make you very smart and make your memory last forever, and you will live a long life. So Tim says, well, I'll try it. So he downs this big thing of snake oil. And I thought, this guy is not going to amount to much. He doesn't have very good judgment. And he's constantly crashing cars, and he's drinking snake oil. And of course, most recently, he showed that kind of sort of ne'er-do-well judgment on dividing California into 6 parts. So, those of you who don't know, he decided to promote, to get everybody closer to their government. He thought there ought to be 6 governments. He hates government, by the way, but he's much more conservative than I am, and he thinks, I said, well, what about an army? Well, no, we could have a private army, and you know, this kind of, we could do away with this and that and the other thing. So I'm thinking, this guy is just totally, I'm just worried whether he'll be able to get through life with, my God, he's started this Draper University. Well, the first thing he did was to buy the hotel, the Ben Franklin Hotel on 3rd Street in Menlo Park, in San Mateo. And he had no idea what he was going to do with it, but it had been empty for 10 years, and he renovated the whole thing. I think it was actually Adam that suggested that maybe he should get a school going. Anyway, he starts this Draper University, all based on innovation and fantastic results. The students are really excited about it. It was that he'd take anybody and everybody that applied. He takes 40 at a time, 3 times a year, and now he's taking about 1 out of 5 that apply, and it's a classy thing. It gets better and better, and the kids love it, and he has done so many good things. Draper Fisher Jervison was a big success, and now I think Draper and Draper, or whatever the hell they're going to call it, I don't even know that they got a name for it with his son. I'm sure it will succeed. So you never know about your kids. So when you guys have kids, give them a chance, let them go. And I'll tell you another background on the venture side. I had a little SBIC, Small Business Investment Company. It was just a family thing because I had it for private investments that didn't work for Sutter Hill. They always got first crack at anything, but if I want to do something, I put some money from this little SBIC, which, as you know, Small Business Administration lends $3 for every dollar you put in to a small company, and so I had put in I had maybe 12 investments in this thing, and that was about that time, 81 or something. I knew George H.W. Bush was a good friend of mine, and he got me to come back and run the Export-Import Bank for Ronald Reagan. when they were both elected president and vice president. So I was going to do that in a slow, careful way and everything. But then Jim Baker called me and said, we need somebody, we need you to come and help as deputy head of personnel in the White House, head of presidential personnel. So well, when do you need me? Well, actually, we want you to get on a plane tomorrow. And I didn't do that, but I came pretty quick. And so I just dumped this thing on Tim. And I said, hey, take care of these 12 investments and good luck. So he at that time had worked for Alex Brown and Hewlett Packard. Those were his experiences up to that point. And so he learned the venture capital business all on his own. So my advice on multi-generational is try not to hit them with your car when they're riding a bike, but whatever happens, leave them alone, let them do crazy things, encourage them in every direction, and just sit back and watch, and it turns out to be a good show. That's the answer I can give to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.